The topic of today's video is a request from a commenter to one of my recent videos, which was about the inner pattern of the minor pentatonic scale. So just to quickly recap on this, the inner pattern of the minor pentatonic scale video was looking at how, as beginners, we normally learn 5 independent individual shapes to the minor pentatonic scale. What we don't then learn is necessarily how they connect to a bigger picture. So we know how we can join the 5 together to play along the fretboard, but oftentimes that's where the information ends. So the point of that video was to show actually what's happening in that scale, and indeed other scales, is one pattern that repeats. And the reason we have 5 separate shapes is because it just depends which string has the root note. That's in a nutshell what that's about. I'll put a link below. So in response to that video, someone's asked me to do this video about chord fills, particularly through the lens of beginners. So initially I thought I'd do this quite quickly. It's not the most complicated topic, and as I was giving it a thought, particularly with it being for beginners, I thought it's actually slightly bigger than it may first seem as a teaching opportunity. So the reason I say that is because chord fills are a perfect way to understand the relationship between chords and scales, and they're a perfect opportunity to see why that's invaluable. So let's just touch on that for a second. Beginners, you learn chords and you learn scales, and you learn them independently. So it takes some time before you taught the relationship between them, and the relationship is very important, the understanding is very important, but unfortunately some people go a long time before they learn it, and it's a bit of a eureka moment. So what I want to touch on in this video is how we can take these seemingly separate individual things and how they come together for things like chord fills. And in particular, we're going to look at chords, scales, intervals, which are really the main thing here. And it also includes things like arpeggios and even triads. So I've got videos on triads and scales and chords and everything. There aren't a huge amount of videos on my channel, so it won't take you too long to find any on this topic that are of interest to you. But so today, what I wanted to do was give a few different examples of how we can pick notes for chord fills intentionally, instead of just saying, well, it's a minor chord or a major chord, major progression, so we have to use a major scale. You know, scales are great, but the downfall to them is when we just randomly noodle up and down through them because we know they're going to sound good, rather than intentionally picking the notes for the sounds we want. So just before we move on from this, one of the best things you can do if you're learning this is either get a looper pedal or connect your guitar to a computer where you can record, and record just one chord or progression and then play specific intervals. So you'll learn, what does a major and a minor 3 sound like against that chord? What does the 4 sound like? What does the 7 sound like? What does the minor 7 sound like? These things will they'll quickly show you the kind of spectrum, the palette, the different colors that you've got to work with for sound. And then you'll always know, okay, well, I want that sound, I want the sound of a 6 here, and then it's just a case of knowing the fretboard to find the 6. And we'll get into that too. So I'm going to go through a few different examples. We'll do a major and a minor and look at the scales and how we can intentionally do this. So one good thing to learn if you haven't yet is the cage system. That will help you tie this all together, and while I'm not going to go too much into it here, you'll see with this first example that it uses the cage system. So we're going to start with the G shape, which I'm assuming everyone's familiar with. We're going to take that shape, turn it into the caged version, and play it a C major chord. So we're going to play C major here with the root note on the 8th fret of the low E string. So we use our pinky here, then the ring finger fret 7 on the A string. This is the major 3rd interval, and then index finger 5th fret on the D string. This is the interval of the 5th. So you've got 1, 3, 5, and then we're going to bar this for the next 2 strings, which is, just for illustrative purposes, this is an A major shape. Okay, so we're doing these 3 strings, D, G, B, in the 5th fret, bar that. So what we've got here is 1, 3, 5, 5, 1, 3. So we're not playing the top string. Okay, so this is a G shape. You can hopefully see this. What the index finger here is doing is closing off what would be the open strings in a G major chord here. Okay. So we're gonna remove this. So we're not gonna play the low E, which means this is still C major, but the root note here is the 3rd. So playing this. So we've got a major chord, and it's a C major. So let's see what we can do to get some chord fills here. So straight away we can see, particularly if we put this finger back, there's a pentatonic shape jumping out at us. So that is box or shape 5 of the major pentatonic scale. So going back to what I said before, you could, if you wanted to, play through the C major scale knowing that it's going to sound pretty good against the C major chord. And it will sound good, but it won't sound like you. Okay, it won't sound like what you're trying to go for necessarily. So let's do this again. So this is the 3. So let's do a chord fill where we start on the 3. That is the interval that makes this a major chord. It's a nice happy sound. Okay, so so see that again. So we're playing here. So as I said before, we've got 1, 3, 5. Okay, so we start on the 3. That's the 5, which means that's the 6. 7. For that to be the 7 means this must be the 8, which is an octave of the root, and it is. Okay, so that is the C, the root inside that A major shape. So what we're playing here, root, 3, 5, root, and then 3. So that root, we've got octaves. So 3, 2, back to 3. So these are just intervals from the major scale. So the reason I pointed out the other C here, even though I didn't play it, was just to reference the fact that this is good for beginners in particular. Is once you know it, it sounds like a silly thing to say, but the same note, you know, octaves apart, are closer together than you might think. So we've got one here, 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 here. They are closer than you think, which means if you know the scale, as in you know the intervals in the scale, and you know that if you're playing a root, the 2 is 2 frets up, the major 3 is 2 frets up from that again. Once you know that, anytime you land on a root or a given interval, you know exactly where to go next. Okay, so let's do this again. So that's the root, 2, flat 3, major 3. Okay? Same note we're starting on here. So, to bring this back to that example. So that's a little fill starting on the 3. What if we wanted to do it from the root, from the 1? Pretty much the same progression, like the same notes being played, the same. It's not the same intervals, but the same finger pattern, like the distance between the notes I'm choosing. But the reason it sounded different is because they're different intervals. So starting from the 1. Compare that to the first one. Okay, so what about another one? From the 1 again. So this time, put in this. So what's that? Okay, 1, 2, major 3, 4, 5. Same notes, that's the 5. Which again is from in the chord, right? It's in the chord. So you'll also notice, if you know your pentatonic shapes, that looks like 2 boxes connecting, and it is. That's box 5 of the major. And that goes into box 1, so that is 2 boxes being played together. So it's 2 examples of how we could choose fills, and we're specifically choosing from intervals instead of just playing scale patterns. Okay, so we wanted the first time to emphasize the 3, the second time we wanted to begin on the 1. That's the major pattern. Okay, and you can see how the pentatonic shapes fit into that. So I want to be very clear that I'm not saying don't play the scales, because actually by choosing the intervals you kind of end up playing notes from the scale anyway. The difference is the starting point. There's a very big difference, and there will be a big difference in what you how you express yourself musically when you're just playing through a scale because you know the shape, and when you specifically intentionally choose notes, right? So I hope that's clear. So that's the major. So just to recap, and we'll move on to a minor now. So 1, 3, 5. Okay, if you understand how major chords are constructed, you take the 1, the 3 and the 5 from the major scale. A minor chord, you flatten that 3. So 1, 3, 5. This here under my ring finger is the 3. We need to flatten it, which means you move down 1 fret. Okay, so 1, 3, 5. So the 1 and the 5 are in the same place. So if we play that same as before, now we've got that major 3, so this one needs flattening as well. So that leaves us with so do that as a chord. Okay, and you may recognize if we remove the pinky, this is a minor shape. So in the same way that earlier we had the major shape of an A, this is an A minor shape, and we've shifted up to here to the C, and we've just again got a low 3 here. So let's see how we can work with this. What are we doing? Okay, this is the minor 3, as I said. So if you know your scale and you know the intervals, that means this is the 2. So 2, flat 3. This would be the major 3, but we're not playing that in a minor chord. 4, 5. So this is just back to the chord. so the scale 1, the C, again octaves. Okay, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 8, or C again. Okay, so do that again. So it's fairly straightforward. You do need to know the scale, but again, we're choosing deliberate intervals. Okay, and you can see how we went back up that same note here, and then turn that into the C minor bar chord. So hopefully you can start to see how what started out as separate, individual, very confusing things on the guitar actually all linked together in a meaningful way and an almost repetitious way. So we looked at the major pentatonic shapes from this. Let's do the same for the minor quickly and then we'll move on to a progression. This is the chord playing. So what would this be? Okay, this is the root note. If you know the minor pentatonic shapes. That's what is shape 4. And then it shifts into shape 5 here. Okay, so these two examples, major and a minor, just single chords showing you how we can choose specific intervals that would work. Now let's do a progression. This will be a 1-4-5 progression. So if you're not familiar with what that means, 1-4-5 is a very, very popular chord progression using the 1 from the scale, for the major scale, the 4 and the 5. These are played as major chords. And you would have heard a million songs. Well, major. So how do we put chord fills into this progression? So we're going to stick with that C shape, but this time we're only going to use this version, the triad, those 3 notes. We're not going to have these. Okay, so let's try this. So that's the 1, this being the root. Our 4 is here, and our 5 is here. So to play those chords. Okay, so I've already mentioned this, the A shape. To make the shape of the chord for the next chord for the 4. Middle finger goes here, fret 6 on the B string, and then fret 7 on the D string. So, and then for the 5, we just slide this up 2 frets. Okay, so what can we do with this? Okay, what do we do there? Okay, so we're playing this. We're gonna start on the root, which is fret 5 on the G string. That's our C. We're gonna play the 7, fret 7, not the 7th interval. And we're gonna go down here, fret 5 on the B, and then fret 6 on the B. And that goes into the chord. Okay. And we're going to repeat that but end on the 5. So that's what that feels. This is what we call it being used as a leading tone. So that's what's happening, but we're putting it into the progression. Now we're going to go back to the root, doing the progression, but how do we get there? How do we put a feel to that? So personally, I like doing a chromatic little rundown. Chromatic just meaning consecutive notes. That looks like this. Okay, so it'd be in terms of intervals, that's the 5, the flat 5, the 4, and then the 3 is being played in the chord. So with that 3. So, excuse me. What if we wanted to include other intervals in this? That's the 5, so if we wanted the 6. Well, that's a bit out of the way. Luckily, there's one here, right below the chord we're playing. If you play the E, that's the 6. If that's the 6, that must mean that's the 7. So you can hear the difference. So if we do 7, 6, 5 chord. That's 7, 6, 5 chord. Now let's do 7, 6, 4. And again, you can do a chromatic, include the flat 7. So here's why it's important now that we're not just relying on the scale, because when you do these chromatic runs, they're not in the scale. So we did the first one, that's got a flat 5. That's not in the scale, and this flat 7 is also not in the scale, the major scale, sorry. So if you're just blindly playing the shapes that you know, you're going to miss out these options for the flavors, right? And that being the 7 means that's the octave. And you notice that's just literally using the notes right around us. So there's a major scale under your fingers. Okay? And there's also one that way. This is the root, so that's the 7, 6, open, 5. Okay? So this comes back to what I said at the beginning. If you learn the instrument, as in you learn where the notes are, and you learn how those notes sound together in different ways, you develop fluency. So instead of just playing a chord that you know, you learn the shape, and you learn a scale shape, and you think, okay, well, I'll play the minor pentatonic over a minor scale. The minor pentatonic over a minor chord. Yeah, you know it will sound pretty good, but you don't really know why, and you're not intentionally choosing notes, and you're not adding any little elements of your personality. Like the chromatic run, where we include a note that's not in the scale. So you be deliberate. And again, with this progression, deliberately kept it here, all in one place, and the notes are just right here. But you can explore this way, and you can explore this way, and you know, we got this C here, so the 4 for this is here. Okay, so it's all over the place, and that's the good fun about it. So you can also find different chord voicings. So this chord here, that's a G. This note here is the root, and that's a G, right? So if you don't know every note on the neck yet, you can figure this out. So this is a B, because it's a B string. This is the octave, fret 12th fret, A, G, and that's the root, so that's a G major. And this is the 3. So if you want to make it a G minor, we move that down. We can change the finger in a minute, but okay. So got a G, so 1, C, F is the 4, 5 is the G. We can also play a G, as we know, here, but that wouldn't work, would it? It's too open and ringing. We can do a smaller triad here. That's a G. Find the octave. 1, 3, 5. Okay, so everything's nice and compact. So how do we get a feel to get there? Easy. In fact, that wasn't even any notes that aren't being played in the chord. Playing the 4, 3, 1, 5, and that 5 is the root note of this next chord, it's the G. Okay, so I hope that helps. I think that's a good place to end this lesson, but to recap on the principles here, yes, it's important to learn chords and scales. You do have to learn those, and it's beneficial to learn the different shapes, the different boxes, you know, the shapes of say the 5 boxes of a scale. That's good information to have, but it can't be the end of your learning because it's incomplete information. And they just tells you what the patterns are, but not why. So the next step for you is to figure out what the intervals are in there. If you don't know what intervals are, then learn the intervals. It's really just the gaps between notes. Okay, so if this is a 1, that's the 2, right? So, and then a 3 is here. These are intervals. And then you take specific intervals, the 1, 3, 5, to make a major scale, major chord. You flatten that 3 to make a minor chord. Okay, so you then, once you know what the intervals are and what they sound like, you can then choose specific ones for these fills. As you gain fluency in what notes are where around the neck, you can choose your chord voicings, which is just where on the neck you play a chord because it sounds slightly different. And you can choose specific intervals and notes to add the flavor that you specifically want. Okay, so this really, you take the base knowledge of I'm learning shapes and you're building on it to the point where eventually you'll kind of not really need the shapes. You will still play the shapes just because that's where the notes are, but you won't be playing the shapes because you rely on the shapes. So I hope that's clear, and I hope you can see why chord fills are, it was a good question, and I was pleased to receive it because they don't really get a lot of attention. And the more I thought about the request I had to do this video, the more I realized actually as a learning tool they're very powerful because they can combine these things that we learn individually, chords, scales, hopefully intervals, triads, arpeggios, and it can combine them all together in a meaningful way, so you can see that this is an interconnected system. So I'll leave it here. If you have any more questions on this, any more requests, anything doesn't make sense, let me know. I feel like this may be something you need to watch a couple of times. I threw quite a bit of information in here, but hopefully as you watch it 2, maybe 3 times, it starts to make more sense than it made you on the first watch through. And feel free, of course, to copy the chords I was playing, the shapes, and understand why they are those chords. So the 1, 3, 5 here from this shape that we were playing, this being the 1, then the next 4 here, that being a major chord shape. If you're used mainly to playing open chords, learning here can be a bit intimidating at first, but it just opens up opens up everything on the fretboard. So best of luck with it, and I hope you have fun.